All right, what's up, guys? Welcome into Packers Total Access. My name is Clayton. You can check us out on packernet.com. You can find me on Twitter at Packers_access. If you'd like to email the show, you can send a message to PackersTotalAccess@gmail.com. We've got a special guest on the pod tonight. This is going to be a real treat. I've got to chat with Tony offline and getting to know him. And, man, I tell you, for someone who was just such a mauler on the football field, this is a guy that I think you guys are going to come to find out real quick. Is just I don't know, man. It's just like we instantly connected, Tony. You've got that in you, man. And I know you're doing some public speaking and things like that off on the side, and it shows. But we've got Tony Mandarich, the former number 2 overall pick in the 1989 draft. Golly, you were 1988 All-American in college football. Recruited by the great Nick Saban, which is kind of cool because I just learned that your parents were Croatian immigrants and Nick was Croatian. Is that right?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was.
And that was an instant connection, was it not?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. It was. And he had, I'm from Canada, so he had, when he was recruiting me to Michigan State, he had come to Canada, I would say 3 times, visited with me and my parents. So it was, that was like early 1980s, 83, 84. So, and recruiting has just got more and more competitive and intense. So, but yeah, it's like the coaches are, man, they put in some hours.
Yeah. And I've kind of followed along with Nick Saban. I'm a closet. I'm down here in the middle of the SEC, right? But I'm kind of a closet Nick Saban fan. There was a time where I liked to root against Bama, but now I'm to the point where I'm like, I kind of want Nick to win a few more. He seems like a really good guy.
He's legit. I mean, there's, so he recruited me and I know Nick very well. I know his wife, Terry, well. And there was even a time in college where me and my girlfriend at the time babysat for him. Right. So it's like, it was like if the guy that recruits you usually will look out for you, even if he's not your position coach, because he was a DB coach at Michigan State.
That's
on
right.
The offensive line. So even though he didn't coach me every day, he was always kind of like, hey, you doing all right? Make sure you're going to class. Kind of, it's like your guy, right? It's like, and that's how I think it probably still is today. But Nick was really, believe it or not, he's obviously different 30, 40 years later.
Right.
But fundamentally, he was the same. He was the same. He was about discipline. He was about just do your job. He was about all the things that you see on TV now about him and talks he gives and this and that. That was Nick back in the early 80s, and he just wasn't known like he is now. And obviously he's changed because, of growth, and he's got 6, 7 national championships. And if somebody would have told me, even knowing what I know about Nick, if somebody would have told me when he went to Alabama that he would be, considered one of probably at this point today the best Alabama coach ever, I would say there's no way you could say that with because of Bear Bryant.
Right.
But I don't even think it's an argument anymore.
No, it's not.
I mean, he is the best Alabama coach ever, and that is zero disrespect to Coach Bear Bryant. Right. And I still think he has 3 or 4 championships in him. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. And, he kind of gets dogged a little bit because he went to Miami and struggled with the Dolphins. But, a lot of people don't know he was real big on he wanted to sign Drew Brees. And it sounds like ownership was a little bit more hesitant than him to sign Brees. And, I heard a saying the other day, Tony, they said the 3 keys to being a good head coach in football is a patient wife, a loyal dog, and a good quarterback, not in that order. I'm thinking if he had Drew Brees, he's probably still coaching in the NFL,
Right. I mean, you think about Drew Brees was leaving San Diego then, I think, because they said San Diego thought Drew Brees' career was over.
Right.
And he ended up going on to play another 10, 12 years and win Super Bowls.
Playing his best football, right?
Right. And a Big Ten quarterback, I will mention. And but people sometimes, and it's not just fans. But, I mean, it's probably going to be a little bit more specific to fans because these are the people with the strong opinions. But you have to remember, at the end of the day, whether you're a coach or whether you're a player, at that level, it's a business.
Yeah.
And Nick would have succeeded in the NFL. I'm very confident about that. There were just other opportunities that probably were more attractive. And there were probably some things about the pros that he loved. There was probably some things about the pros he didn't really, appreciate. What really made his, what really filled his void, if you will, or what really cranked his blood was coaching kids, right? And developing, guys that would come in as freshmen. By the time they get to their fourth or fifth year, they're turning into young men going into the world or going into the NFL. So if that's your calling, then he's doing it awfully well.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Got Dakota in the chat. What's up? Hey, Dakota, appreciate you hanging out with us. Also got Jacob in here with us, who said, what's up, fellas? Can't wait to listen to this interview. Go Pack, go. You see right. Tony already sporting the G. He's carrying the G tonight.
Right.
You got to love
That's
it.
That's right.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about it a little bit. It's funny. We had a order we were going to go in, and we're already off. I've already got it off the rails here, Tony. That's the way it works on this pod.
We'll just let it roll, right?
Yeah.
That's the best way.
Speaking of Green Bay, we'll wrap back around, and I want to get all the details of just what it was like to be a Packer. But, we kind of talked a little bit about, the city of Green Bay and the community and the Packer fans. What was kind of your experience just with the fans there in Green Bay? What was it like being a Packer, back in, 1989?
Yeah, 89 and 92 for me. And it's like looking back, even, I left there in 92, after 92, even in the early 2000s. This was even after I played in Indianapolis for 3 years. Looking back, and, I was in a bad place. And when I say I was in a bad place, I personally was in a bad place. It wasn't that Green Bay was the bad place. And my lack of appreciation for what Green Bay was and what it represented and what the people represented and what the state of Wisconsin represented, I just had such a bad, immature attitude. And little did I know, I had this, it was really like a selfish attitude, because I was like, what's in it for me? Like, what's in it? Where can I get the biggest, deals for, promotional stuff? Well, probably in the biggest markets like New York or LA or whatever the case may be. That's how I approached it. That's how I looked at it. Where now, getting old, older or wiser, as I like to say, you look back and you go, you had the opportunity to play at the mecca of an NFL team, like of the NFL. It's like, I don't care what people in Texas say about that one team. You slap a star on your helmet, you're called America's team. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, the Pack, I've never seen in my life, this includes college football, because fans in college football are, crazy. But as far as loyalty goes, like loyalty fans, I've never ever seen fans in the NFL as loyal as Packer fans. And obviously for home games, obviously for support for the team, even when you're losing, yeah, they would get on you, as they should when you're losing. But we would go to away games, and it didn't matter if it was West Coast or if it was down south or in the Midwest. And I swear it's like a third of the stadium was green and gold. And we'd be the road team. And, out of that third of that stadium, I'm sure some of them were traveling Packer fans that were from Wisconsin, but a lot of them were, say, native to the city that we were playing, or, close to that surrounding area, and they were loyal to the Packers, right? They were, bleeding green and gold. And so you kind of like, at first it's a surprise, but then you're kind of like expect it. And then when you leave, and then if you go play for a different team, in my case, it was Indianapolis, you don't see that. I mean, it's not even close. And that's not a diss on Indianapolis. I don't really see it there's a few other teams that have some loyalty like that, like Dallas.
Yeah.
Miami, I think, used to have it. I don't know if they have it as much anymore, but there's a few teams like that that have that kind of loyalty. But even those teams don't, from what my experience has been, I don't see it like how Green Bay fans do it. I mean, they are hardcore, and they're not. You know what? They're not idiots. There's some fans that are idiots. Like there's some fans that are just there are some fans in the
True.
NFL that are just like a group of fans or that are just, let's just say they're unsafe, and Packer fans are not like that. They're as loyal as can be. It's I wish I would have appreciated it more when I was there, so I could have let it sink in more. But at least I got to the point where I could look back and appreciate it and be like, man, that place is special.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very well said. I kind of told you offline my experience, and
Yeah.
I know our listeners have heard it 100 times. I'm so passionate about the team, but what I've dug into is the history of the city of Green Bay and how football got actually introduced. Was a young man by the name of his name was Fred, who came from college playing rugby, and at the time in the 1800s, these rugby players were starting to change the rules a little bit, and that
Right.
ended up becoming what pro football is today, American football, I should say.
Right.
And he introduced it to the city of Green Bay. They started a town team. Then next thing you know, you got two high school teams, East and West, big rivals.
Right.
And it was just this perfect storm, with just one or two of those details of the story itself, maybe the story doesn't unfold the way it does. It's just thin threads. And speaking of thin threads, let's kind of go back to the beginning a little bit. I know there's so many Packer fans that haven't heard your story, and you grew up in Canada, like I said. Your parents were Croatian immigrants, and you had a brother too that played football. Am I thinking right, at Kent State?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, he played at Kent State University in Kent, Ohio, and then he was the first-round draft pick in the Canadian Football League with the Edmonton Eskimos. Played there, I think, 10 years, and then after that, 1 year with, I think, Ottawa in the Canadian League. But he was a big influence for me to play football. And he's just a great guy and relentless at work ethic and just relentless at, like, don't even think about making an excuse as far as missing a workout or something like that. And the cool thing was I mean, he was 5 years older, and it was like, he's my brother, he was my hero, and very influential on me. And he had gotten a scholarship to Kent State, so it kind of planted that seed of, this is something I think I would like pursue. I would like to do. And we lived in, grew up in Southern Ontario, just outside of Toronto. So Buffalo was a 45-minute drive. Detroit was a 3-hour drive. So, back in the day, back in the late 70s or mid 70s, late 70s, you're getting those three main networks. So I'm always watching the Bills or the Lions, right? Or the Eagles, Philly in the afternoon. And so you're limited, but the stuff you do see, I'm sitting there glued to the TV, and literally at 11 years old, I made a decision that I was like, this is what I want to do for a living. I mean, it was like one of those, when I grow up, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I remember writing it down on a piece of paper, and, luckily, there had to be some luck, but a lot of work too. And it worked out.
That's awesome. Absolutely awesome. And if I understood correctly, it was, did your brother, if I heard the story right, your brother convinced your parents to let you go to high school in the States? Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We talked about it because, these days, U.S. colleges do recruit in Canada, especially in that area where I grew up, because it's the most of the population's in that area. And but back in that day, they didn't come to Canadian or U.S. colleges, or at least the big ones didn't come to Canada to recruit, because it was Canadian football, high school football especially, is like almost like, I don't want to say non-existent. I mean, it's there, but compared to U.S. high school football, it's like a whole different ball game. And so he convinced my parents and to move down with him and to live with him when he was a senior at Kent State. And I would go to the local high school, Kent Roosevelt High School, and hopefully when scouts would come to the football games at Kent Roosevelt, the college scouts, that, you know, I would get noticed and hopefully get a scholarship. That was really like the plan, right?
Yeah.
What worked out luckily for us was Kent Roosevelt had 5 players that were like tier 1 recruits. And so obviously there's going to be tons of scouts coming. So that obviously helped me out. And Ohio was one of Coach Saban's areas for recruiting. And Coach Saban went to Kent State. And one of Coach Saban's very good friends was Coach John Nemec, who was my head coach at Kent Roosevelt High School. So it's like interesting how the whole dynamic tied in. So John Nemec, my high school head coach, had said to Nick, you know, look, we've got these other guys. He's like, which obviously you should check out, but he's like, there's this kid that came down from Canada and I think he's got some ability and you should, you know, if you're interested, this is his number and watch him play. And, you know, one thing led to another and took, you know, talked to Nick and took a visit to, you know, East Lansing and I took a visit to a few other places, but once I went to East Lansing, I knew that was the place.
Yeah. Those school visits really matter, don't they? In college
they do.
football. Yeah.
They do. And they do. And they've changed a ton since, you know, when I was going, like when you know, my visit, you know, it's like, yeah, they wine you and they dine you and they want you to have fun and a good time and all that. But now it's still a lot of that, but there's a lot of things that have changed that I've, you know, just heard firsthand from people about, you know, now, you know, high school recruits that are, doesn't matter if they're super high end or like top tier recruits or not. It's like, they're asking questions like, how many different uniforms are we wearing this year? And I'm like thinking to myself, what do you mean? Like how many different, I mean, it's like we wore, you know, our dark uniforms at home and our white uniforms or lighter colored uniforms on the road. And that's just how it was, you know, for ever since I could remember. That's how it was in the NFL ever since I could remember. So when, you know, I think when Nike and Oregon, you know, got their thing going and every game they had different uniforms, different helmets, different chrome this, chrome that, and shiny this and shiny that. Yeah, you know, I think it was cool, but you know, there's a part of me that says, do I want a kid playing for me? If I'm a coach at a college, do I want a kid playing for me where their most important priority is how many different uniforms do we have this year? So that is, you know, that's like a huge change that, you know, now granted, I mean, you got to roll with changes, but you have that. And then you have this whole portal thing, you know, with recruiting that is changing a lot of things.
Yeah. NIL is the Wild West. I am watching it so close. Like, my goodness, how is this going to play out? You know,
yeah,
there's going to be agencies involved and agents will always find a way to get their hands on some of that. Right. I mean,
they will.
Yeah.
In the big scheme of things, you know, look, I want the kids to make money. Yeah, I do.
Sure.
But I think it's going to implode. I think it's going to implode within 2 or 3 years. Like there's going to be so many negative things that were not foreseen coming as far as distractions that they're going to either really put, you know, boundaries and rules on it, like, and they have them now already, but even like just make it real strict. But if you don't have a consequence, you could play at 5 different colleges in 5 years, right? When I went to college, if you transferred, I mean, you better make sure you're making the right choice because you got to sit a year. So here, there's no consequence for that. Right. It's like if you don't like what, you know, because you're not starting and you think you should be starting and that's why you're leaving, you know, what does that say about you as far as a player or a young man on how to handle adversity?
Yeah.
You know,
right. So. These are all things that scouts are looking for, and that's the big. I don't know. That's the big thing that I'm learning as I get deeper into this fandom of not just the Packers but the NFL in general is just the background checks alone and trying to dig in a little bit deeper and going, is this someone who loves the game of football? Is this someone who's going to dedicate themselves? And I know at Michigan State, if I remember the story correctly, Nick was trying to kind of explain to you, here's what the daily grind is going to look like. And you basically told him, well, I'm going to do twice as much, right? That's
more or less. Yeah, more or less that was the conversation. Or, he was basically saying, there's going to be a lot of demand. We have very high standards, and we're going to hold everybody, including you, to high standards of expecting you to do this, and this, as they should. They're investing money into you as a scholarship. And I was like, yeah. And I said, I'll do the workouts, but I'm also going to do my own workouts in addition to, like, my weightlifting workouts. And he looked at me like just puzzled. He looked at me puzzled, like, I don't know if this kid understands how tired he's going to be when we get done with him, right? And to his point, he was right. But internally, I had that thing that I wanted to be the best college football player in the country at my position. And if that's what you're going to say, and if that's what your drive is, well, you can't train like everybody else. You have to do more. And, that applies in sport, business, doesn't matter what it is. If you want to be the best dog groomer, you have to groom more dogs, or whatever it is. You have to put the time in. You have to, rinse and repeat, refine, and keep going. So, I was like, if I want to be an extraordinary player, I need to put in extraordinary work above and beyond what's asked of me.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, business and everything else in life, if you want to live like no one else, you've got to live like no one else. Right.
Right.
Right. I mean, above the line, all those,
you can't live 9 to 5. Yeah. You can't live 9 to 5 if you want the extra.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with 9 to 5.
Right.
That's just it. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't criticize somebody that wants to work 14 hours a day either.
Exactly. So, yeah. If you, I'm trying to be nice here, but I mean, the way I look at it, we grew up a little bit rough. I was born in a house from projects, and I watched my mom scrap her ass off her entire life to give her family what it needed. And, when I look up and go, hold up, you're going to hold it against me because I'm wanting to work harder. No, I ain't.
Right.
Get them out of my life. Right. Get them out of my life. It's the only way you can handle it.
Agreed.
So let's get into, I guess, kind of the tough part. You're at Michigan State, and I hope this isn't inappropriate, but
nothing's inappropriate. If it's inappropriate, I'll say, look, it's inappropriate.
This is the thing that the way I always looked at the game of football, and I grew up in the 90s, right? My earliest memories were the late 80s, and I don't want to sit here and pretend like, oh, I knew who the players were and this and that. Just as a young boy, it's like, man, I've fallen in love with this game of football. There was a movie that came out, and this is kind of off cuff. I didn't tell you we were going to talk about this, but this just came to mind. One of my favorite movies is called The Program. It's a college football movie.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember when it came out, there were so many people going, oh, that's not how it really is. That's not, what's the college game's about. And they're just trying to downplay it and, dog it and this and that. And lo and behold, all these years later, we look up and go, that's how everything was going on. There were boosters paying players. Now it's legal to pay them, right?
Right.
There were boosters paying players. We all know about steroids. To me, I don't know all the history of steroids, but the 70s seemed like the era when it really, boom, it kind of came onto the scene. So you had, all these college players are looking for that advantage, and it's one of those things too, just like any addiction. I think, Tony, that you get addicted to succeeding too. It's like,
absolutely.
I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure I'm the best. Absolutely. And some people like to virtue signal and stand on their ivory tower and say, I did it the right way and this and that. And there's a lot of people that said that until they had to come clean. And I just don't look at people during that era and go, that's a bad person. I go, that was someone who was willing to do whatever it took. People pretend like the work still didn't have to be
Right,
done, right?
right,
And
right,
it's
right.
like you had all these players that were trying the same thing to try to gain that advantage, but only a handful of them really came out the other side and were willing to put in the work, right? So
Right.
when it comes to college football, and as you got ready for the NFL draft, and I was reading you ran a 4.640 at
Correct.
6'6", and how many
Yeah.
pounds, Tony?
That day I was 308.
308 running a
Yeah.
4.640. My gosh!
Yeah.
So you're kind of getting ready to go into the NFL, whether it was your junior, senior year, or whatever, as you're kind of winding down the college
Yeah.
career. What was the moment where it's like, okay, I'm going to do everything I can to gain that advantage, and kind of, how did that come about? I guess is the best way to ask it.
Well, so it would be you're always, well, I shouldn't say if you're in that mindset, you're always looking for the advantage. And that doesn't mean, I mean, that includes legal advantages. That includes, and I was talking with a buddy of mine earlier about, the 40 time and the fast 40. Well, that didn't happen. A lot of people say, well, it was the steroids. And it's like, okay, well, that was maybe a spoke in the wheel of 20 spokes that made the
Right.
complete player. Nobody really talks about the fact that I worked with the track coach at Michigan State for 2 full years. And for the sole purpose of sprinting a 40, a fast 40, because the way you sprint a 40 is not how you block as an offensive lineman. As an
Right.
offensive lineman, you want a wide base and you want to chop your feet, and you don't want to, you never want to cross your feet over because you lose leverage and the guy can just toss you, like Reggie White did me, and and he did it to many people.
Absolutely.
But I got a strength. I mean, I spent time with our track coach at Michigan State, and I had him teach me I said, this is 2 years before the combine. So I have 2 full seasons of football left. And I went to that coach knowing that I'm working on this for something that's going to happen 2 years from now, because I know that that's a valuable thing, that if you do well at this, it's going to help with the shuttle, doing a running shuttle, and you're making a business investment in yourself, right? So I learned the best techniques that I could learn on how to sprint, coming out of the blocks. Even though we couldn't use blocks when we were doing the 40, it's like the best way to sprint if you don't have blocks, but come out, and how to use your hands, how to use your legs, how to use your hips, how to finish through the finish line at the 40. So I spent 2 off seasons learning all that and practicing it. So part of it is yeah, I mean, you have to have some gift of speed and or athletic ability, but that has to be also worked on to really refine it. So if everybody could just take a shot of something, a steroid or some magic drug that makes you fast, everybody should be running fast 40s at 308, right? If steroids, and let me just preface by saying I condone the use of steroids. Do not use steroids. Okay. Right. But it's like if you took steroids and they just worked, like you got big shoulders and you got strong and you could bench 500-600 pounds and you could squat 700-800 pounds and do all this, well, then why isn't everybody doing it? Like what? Like, it's like everybody would be doing it. And then the other factor is there was guys stronger than me that just didn't have the ability to be able to put it all together. You got to be able to, wasn't fast enough because they were so big, wasn't quick enough because they were too big and too strong. Then there were some that were big enough, strong enough, fast enough, quick enough, but couldn't think on the run. And that didn't mean that they were stupid. It's just that game is a different animal. And so it's like a football player is a football player.
Yeah.
He's not a tennis player, and I'm sure tennis has so many nuances that I know nothing about, even though I know the fundamentals of tennis, that those guys at the top train all the time on certain things that are little things, but that are the difference between good and great.
Yeah.
So, I trained 2 years for that 40. And, I ran a fast 40 and I had stopped steroids 16 weeks before that. And that was because I was like, the rumors out, and it's a very badly kept secret, obviously. And so I was like, I'm done with it, because now, and I'm kind of making a business decision now. I risk losing if I test positive for steroids.
Right.
And so I was like, I'm done with them.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so 16 weeks later, I run my 40. And to me, I really don't care if people even now say, well, it was because of steroids or whatever. It doesn't matter. I know what the truth is.
Right.
And I don't even think they hold my time in the NFL combine record, because even though it's still to date, nobody's run faster at offensive line. There's been some that have come close. There's been one guy that was like 360, ran a 4.7, which is incredible if you think about it, right? I mean, that's like smoking. But they don't recognize it in the official books because it wasn't run in Indianapolis, where the combine is. It was run at Michigan State. But you had over 30 to 40 scouts and coaches there timing it.
Yeah.
So, and they were all getting pretty much the same times. And it's like, so that kind of like makes me go, well, why are you not counting it? It's like, it's like, I don't lose sleep over it, but I'm like, let's just spit the truth out. If you think that it's not legitimate because I took steroids, then say that.
Right.
But it's something personally I'm proud of, because of all the other work also that went into running that. And that's, we just spent 5 minutes talking about that. And that's one spoke in the wheel.
Right.
That's not even working out like with weights. And that's not even doing offensive line drills.
Yeah.
It's like all these other things. And then you've got, school. You got to go to school. Right. And, and I don't want to say you got to stay out of trouble. I mean, by default, that's expected. But how many great players do we know that blow it because they get in trouble?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like with the law or whatever. I mean, I blew it for myself. I self-sabotaged myself over those 4 years, right? With the abuse of opioids and alcohol at Green Bay. So it's like mine was like a slow self-sabotage. But when you see people get drafted and you see the projection that they were supposed to be in the top 10 picks, and all of a sudden they've dropped down to the third round, it's usually not because of the film. It's usually something that they've done background checks on, that they found out about, or he tested dirty for something, and it probably wasn't a steroid. It was probably a street drug or something, because now, like, steroids in the NFL now, I would say are almost non-existent.
Yeah.
Because the testing is so rigid, and it was getting rigid when I entered.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you were kind of talking about, steroids doesn't just magically make you, a better football player. I think it might give you a little extra of what you need to become that player. I remember when Barry Bonds, that kind of burst onto the scene, and we know how our baseball purists love their stats and love their record books and everything. But,
Right.
I'm personally not a big Barry Bonds fan. Nothing personal. I've just not been like, hey, man, I love Barry Bonds. But I remember when he started catching the heat and he started going after the records. But again, that competitiveness comes out because you look up and go, hold up a minute. Sammy, I just had to sit here, and this is me being Barry Bonds for a minute. I had to sit here and watch Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire get all of this recognition. And break the single season home run record. And I'm sitting over here playing clean, and I'm not even getting noticed. it didn't make Barry Bonds a Hall of Fame baseball player. What it gave
Right.
Barry Bonds is just a little bit more bat speed, which meant a little more time to look at that ball.
Yep.
And that was the edge. And in my opinion, that's the even playing field is,
Right.
okay, now let's see who's a better hitter. Is it Mark
Right.
McGwire or is it Barry Bonds? Because they're both
Right.
on an even playing field.
Right. And Barry Bonds, I'm not a huge baseball fan, although I did follow that whole era, like that part that you're talking about, because of the home run records were being broken. Barry Bonds was probably going to go to the Hall of Fame, even if he never broke a record, like a home run record, because he was already like a tier 1 all-star.
Yeah.
Before he, started really because when you see that big jump in 1 year, it becomes more obvious, right?
Right.
So, but Barry Bonds, and again, I'm not a baseball fan, never met Barry Bonds, don't know Barry Bonds, but he was a great player long before he took steroids. And like you said, he was very competitive and kind of was like, look, if they're doing it, I'm going to do it. This is me assuming this. But you also kind of got to have good hand-eye coordination. I mean, there's a lot more to baseball than just, if everybody could take, or if someone who's a baseball player with aspirations to play in the majors takes steroids, it just doesn't happen. You just don't get to the majors and become great. It's like there's so much work to it.
That's a fact. That is a fact. Let's do this. Let's shift gears.
Yep.
So coming out of Michigan State, we talked about the combine, talked about the preparation, all that. And then you get drafted by the Green Bay Packers. Just start at the beginning, Tony. Like, where were you at when you got the phone call? Were you I don't even know if they invited players to the draft at the time or not. I'm not sure exactly how, because at the time it was at Radio City Music Hall, I believe.
No, in New York.
Yeah.
I believe it was in New York. It was there or Madison Square Garden. I think it was at Radio City.
I think they did rotate. Yeah.
And so 2 weeks prior to the draft, Dallas had come out to the media and said, we are on draft day, we are going to draft Troy Aikman. So we're already starting to negotiate a contract with them. And Green Bay came out and said, if Dallas holds true to their word, then we're going to draft Tony as the second pick. So, and there was really no reason for Dallas to be playing games as far as draft day games, because they needed a quarterback badly.
Right.
And so my draft day experience was actually it was very unique. It was very cool. It was very cool what Green Bay did. They flew me in to be at Lambeau. Because that's where they had, the whole coaching thing, the office, the draft war room, all that was in the stadium in where the coaches' offices are. So, we always see the video of wherever the draft is being held, each team has their table with their little logo, and there's 1 or 2 people there that take a phone call on who to, say to the guy to send the letter up to the commissioner to say, this is who we're drafting. So when Dallas drafted Troy, I was, in Green Bay and, with all the coaches there. And I remember Coach Infante and Tom Bratz saying, okay, we're going to dial this number, which is going to be on the floor of the draft room in Massey or Radio City Music Hall or whatever it was. He goes, but we want you to make the call.
No. That is all.
It was one of the coolest things. It was like, wow, like this is really cool. I was like, this is just really cool. It was, how many times in your life do you get an opportunity to do something like that?
Yeah.
And I was so grateful because I didn't think about it. They came up with that idea. So it was funny because the conversation, although it was very short with the gentleman that I called, who I ended up knowing because he worked for the Packers. I called and they're showing it on live TV, and he answers, and I go, "Hey, it's Tony Mandarich," and so they must have let him in on it. And it's weird to say, "I want you to draft me," Right. So he's like writing my name down, and I'm sure they already had it written down or whatever, and then he gives it to the person, and the person walks it up, and And then I said, all right, thanks, and, I'll meet you when, I'm sure shortly at whatever, when you come back. And which I thought was a very unique, fun experience. That experience I'll never forget the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that was the
Yeah.
old Lambeau Field. It was just,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you see some of the pictures, and if I'm thinking correctly, I believe that front office you were talking about was actually attached at one end zone. It was like
Correct.
like little office complex. It's
Correct.
amazing how times have changed. It's
Yeah.
just, you see some of the, I've actually got a picture of that specific stadium hanging up right here, and it's just,
Right.
it's like, man, it's changed so much. It's
Right.
just
Right.
amazing.
It was awesome.
So you get to your first training camp. What's there's got to be one or two stories, right, from your first training camp where you go, man, like the other day I had Mike Wall on, former offensive lineman for the Packers, and he talked about hitting Reggie, and because this is on the back nine of Reggie's career when he came in as an offensive lineman. He was like, Reggie was different. You hit him, it was like that hurt. That it's like hitting a wall. He just had that natural strength and just being one of the greatest of all time. But with your first training camp, what sticks out? Any stories you got? Anything like that?
Yeah, the biggest story is my holdout. I didn't go to training camp, right? So I held out because of negotiations, and I signed. I believe it was, if I remember correctly, September 5th is when we reached an agreement, and I signed. And so camp was over. So I signed, I think, on maybe a Tuesday or Wednesday, and the kick opener was on Sunday, 3 days later.
Wow.
Yeah. So they had a special thing, which I'm sure they have now. They gave me a 2-week or player exemption, so I wouldn't count against the 53-man roster, but I could be there and I could start learning the offense and I could start practicing, but knowing for the first 2 weeks I cannot step foot on the field to play a game or in the game, because you got to cram this whole new offense and this whole new system into your mind. And not only that, you've got all these players now everybody's good. It's not like, oh good, we're playing this team who's very bad and they have have very average players. Even the bad teams have great players now in the NFL. So my first experience was, I didn't go through camp, and, got a lot of flack for it, as, I guess I should have. But again, it was a business decision.
Right.
Right. And right or wrong or indifferent, that was something that did hurt my adjustment, and that's, again, I own that. It's of my own doing. And when you miss 6 weeks of camp, especially as a rookie, you're missing a ton. You are missing a ton. Even if you're like, well, I don't want to get hurt, it's like, that's okay. Just go to camp, be in shorts and a jersey, watch the plays, learn the plays, go in all the meetings, go into the offices, learn everything except don't hit anybody, because if that's what you're worried about as an unsigned player. So, because that would put you light years ahead of where I was, but I was so arrogant, and I was the boss of, I thought I was the boss, right? I know the best way to do this, and we'll do it my way. And it's like, look, my way almost got me killed.
Yeah. Yeah. God, so that's amazing. So you begin your career in Green Bay, right? You're playing. I mean, you got thrown right into the fire. I mean, you're trying to learn the system and everything, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. At this point, you had stopped using the steroids already. At this point, correct? So you're this is. I'm sure it's somewhat of an adjustment, body wise. Yeah. But what do you think? If there's anything to be learned, I guess would be the best way to ask this. What do you think went wrong in Green Bay? What could you say is, hey, here, this is why it didn't work out. Now, I'm going to say this as a fan. I have come to understand, and head coach Mike McCarthy, who used to be with the Packers, now with the Dallas Cowboys, said when he was with the Packers, he doesn't believe there's any bad players in the league. There are good and they're great. And sometimes
Right.
the difference between good and great is the perfect situation, the perfect scenario for that player. It's just such a thin thread between the
Hmm.
worst team in the league and the best team in the league, right? Any given Sunday, all those things you
Correct.
hear. What would you say it was, Tony, that kind of, you know, kind of went south in Green Bay?
Well,
First of all, I want to say this. I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend, and I know none of our listeners are going to pretend that Green Bay was a powerhouse. They were garbage in the 80s, right? I
right,
mean, it
right,
was as far as a
right.
win-loss record. So we
Not
need to
compared to the when Reggie got there and Brett was taken off. I mean, they
right.
were a different Packer team. But
Mhm.
um, I when I stepped foot in Green Bay, I was already failing, and it had nothing to do with Green Bay. It had to do with me because I had already kind of replaced like steroid use with started to abuse opiates and started to indulge more in alcohol. So I had already was kind of say self-sabotaging, and I was coming into Green Bay tripping, more or less metaphorically, not literally, but I was like tripping. And I never really gave myself a chance or really Green Bay a chance. There was a lot of times I've mentioned this before, not too many times that I've mentioned this, but Green Bay, the organization, the coaches, the people that were immediately attached to it, gave me every opportunity to succeed.
Wow.
They went. There were times when I look back, once my head cleared up after I got sober years later. There were times I looked back and I was like, man, like, this guy, this coach went out of his way to have a sit down talk with me that wasn't like a scolding talk. It was like hey, what's going on? Like, are you okay? Like a human talk.
Wow.
And so, it's like they were salt of the earth people. And then, and then the fan, how do you not mention the fans too? The fans were, as much as fans are fans, they were still forgiving to a degree. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
it's like, maybe if they started to indulge more in alcohol, they didn't become as forgiving, right? They'd become more like you're a bum, you're a bust, or whatever. But I was given plenty of opportunities, and there was plenty of chances where plenty of instances where Green Bay went out of its way to try to help me, but they couldn't put their finger on the problem, and I knew what the problem was.
Gotcha.
It was the chemicals. And everybody, including the media, was so wrapped up into the steroid part. I was like, this is, I'm thinking to myself at that time, this is fantastic. Everybody's distracted by the steroids. I don't have to worry about testing positive for steroids because I'm not taking them. And nobody can, because they're so distracted and focused on this, nobody sees all this opiate abuse.
I didn't even think about that. That
Right.
makes so much sense. Yeah.
So at that time, I'm thinking, boy, this is great. Right. But
Right.
little do you know, it's like, well, the biggest loser is me.
Right.
You're the one sabotaging yourself. You're the one not living up to, even the status quo of what you should be putting out for this organization and this community and these fans.
Yeah. And I don't want to if you're uncomfortable talking about this, it's totally cool. You just say, hey,
No,
no,
I'm fine.
let's not
No.
touch on it. But one of the things I've heard from several players, I've got a friend too that played in the early 2000s actually for the Patriots. He was an undrafted free agent, kind of an edge hybrid defender. Went to camp with them, went on to two other teams. And I've heard this from other people on podcasts and former players were like, you would walk in the locker room. And again, this isn't the dog, the organization or the NFL as a whole, but this is what sticks out in my mind. They said you would walk into the locker room after a practice or in the training room, and they had 55-gallon garbage cans full of painkillers. And it was grab a handful and go. Did you witness that or no?
Never
No.
saw it.
Okay.
I wish, at the time, I would have been like grabbing the whole barrel and putting it in my locker.
Right. And we are
But
talking, those people that I heard say that was probably, what, 20 years difference, from when you played.
yeah,
I was just
eh,
curious with that. Like,
but
I wonder what it was like. How
and
did it
yeah,
come so easy? Obviously the pain, my goodness,
yeah, and it starts off with the correct motivation of taking a medication.
Mhm,
Medication usually medication taken correctly as prescribed will benefit you.
mhm.
That being said, I will throw in a disclaimer that not all medication will do that, especially since the last 3 years. But
Hey, hey,
that's
hey.
my opinion. That's my opinion, and
Well,
that
I'll say this.
doesn't
I
mean
know
I'm
you say
right or
it's your
wrong.
opinion, but we share a similar opinion. I'll just leave it at that. But go ahead.
Right. And I'm not gonna, like it's like I'm not afraid to talk about that issue. But
Yeah.
besides that, like I never saw it's like stuff was not just handed out freely,
Okay.
painkillers and stuff. I can say this, I manipulated many doctors and many pharmacists um, in the state of Wisconsin and surrounding states for narcotics.
Gotcha. And Brett said something similar. Brett Favre said the same thing. Is like he would go around doctors in the area and
Yeah.
make sure that he had everything he wanted and needed. And this
Yeah.
is something that hits home to me, Tony. I didn't tell you this offline, but my my mother actually overdosed on opioids back in 2020, not too long
Okay.
ago.
Right.
She, spent 20 years working on the highway, a black topping company,
Yeah.
and had
Yeah.
to have both her knees replaced. And we lived in a part of the country in Harlan County, Kentucky, which they call the OxyContin capital of the world.
Mm.
These doctors were just, I mean, they were handing it out like candy, trying to get it into the community and everything. And
Right.
there's many documentaries on that and big pharma and all that.
Yeah.
But I watched her literally go from, okay, she had to have both knees replaced. And at first it was for the pain. And then obviously you begin abusing it and it
Right.
ultimately cost her a life, and
Right.
those last, I'm not, it doesn't make me happy saying this, but those last 7 years of her life, it wasn't my mom anymore. It was a different person. And
Right.
a family member, it's frustrating because you're like, how can I help? And at the same time, in the back of your mind, you're going, she was my hero. She was just the
Right.
hardest working human being I had ever,
Right. Right. Right.
in contact with. And it's like, who am I to say I understand what she's
Right.
feeling or going through? And then
Right.
you look up and it's too late. And I hear
Right.
your story and it's like, it wasn't too late, man. You came out the other side, and I think the biggest thing too is owning it. You just got to own it. She never owned it, and
Right.
that's probably what saved your life, right? Is saying, "Hey, look, this."
Well, yeah. I mean, that the grace of God saved my life. It's it
Wow.
was when I had so many, like I said, Green Bay people, and then people in Michigan that when I lived in Traverse City, Michigan, after Green Bay, there was so many people tried to help me, but until the pain became overwhelming, and I want to say more emotional pain than physical pain. But when that pain became so overwhelming that why am I on such a set like a 7-8 year losing streak?
Mhm.
And why are all of these relationships fractured? From family to friends to acquaintances to whatever. And you realize, if you're really going to take a cold hard look at yourself, you're the common denominator in all this stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe let's look at my role in all this stuff. And that's kind of where you at least can start before that, even that admission happens. And for me personally, being able to do that and take a look at myself, that in itself was a miracle and an act of God. Because like I said earlier, I had all the answers. I mean, unfortunately, we have stuff on VHS tape to prove it, right? Because like I had all the answers for me, I had all the answers for you, I had all the answers for the Packers, and it was everybody's fault but mine. It was my mom and dad's fault, my brother's fault, my wife's fault. my coach's fault, the Packers organization, the fans' fault, the media's fault. It's like until I said, hey, wait, maybe it's you. Maybe it's you. And until that happened, and what drove that to happen was emotional pain. And I think that was, there's a friend of mine that says, and I really like this quote. He says, God loved you enough to let you make your own mistakes.
Yeah.
And then you could realize, and then you have a choice. Do I want to continue down this path of hell, or do I want to start correcting things? And just because you remove chemicals, whatever those chemicals are, whether they're steroids or opiates or Coke, or it doesn't matter what it is, just because you remove those, like, it doesn't mean you're a saint. You have to change your behavior. You have to change you. And a lot does change immediately because the chemicals are removed, but there's a lifelong process of working on yourself the rest of your life. And as I get older, or I'll say wiser, almost 57, the road narrows as I get older, and on things that I will do and things I won't do as far as moral laws, and character and stuff like that. And I don't, profess to be a saint. My biggest thing that I really keep, like, I'd like to keep things fundamental and simple. My biggest thing is, am I a better version of myself today than I was yesterday? Because if I am, I'm in the right direction. If I'm not, I need to find out why I'm not, and then I need to correct that. And I shouldn't compare myself to anybody else or any other people. And that's why when we talk, going back a little bit, talking about, the 70s and 80s decade was steroid use was prevalent in the college and pro football. Well, that's why I won't compare to other players. What they did is their business.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to throw anybody into the bus. It's like, if they wanted to, and everybody kind of knew everybody was doing it.
Right.
Okay. So I can only own my stuff and be responsible for my stuff and be transparent about it. And, and again, try to every day be a better version of myself than I was yesterday.
Yeah. God, such a strong response, because it's like everything that everyone wants in life, everything we dream of in life, it's right there to be taken, but we have to get out of our own way. We have to kind of go, hey, look, I don't have all the answers. I don't have, if I did, I would be further along. I have to remind myself that all the time.
Right.
And what you said about, what's the common denominator here? I could not tell you how many times I find myself in a situation and I go, hold up a minute. That person ticked me off. That person ticked me off. This didn't work. And all I can think about, there was this man that lived behind us in Kentucky. His name, I just knew him as Mr. Vanover. This old man. He told me one time, and it stuck with me. I use it on the podcast all the time. He said, if everywhere you go, you smell dog crap, you might want to check your boot. That's what he said.
That's a great line.
I'm telling you, and there's this day,
it's true.
This week. I'm sure this week I was like, hold up, man, it can't be everybody else. Maybe you need to step back a second.
Right.
Wow, that's powerful stuff, Tony. It's powerful,
true.
Man. And someone being willing to open themselves up and be vulnerable and say, hey, look, because if it reaches one person, I don't know if this podcast will, and this talk we have will reach them. I know you're reaching people because I've heard about it.
Right.
But if we reach one person, it was worth it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, I have the opportunity to be able to talk about my personal experience, and that might help somebody. My story is no more important than your story or your mom's story or anybody's story in this chat or anybody that ever listens to this podcast as years go by. Everybody has a story, and everybody's story is important.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a story of alcohol abuse or drug abuse. It could be a story about whatever and how they overcame it, because that's what interests me, is how do you overcome the adversity? How do you do it? Because if you do it kind of the same way I do it, okay, cool. That confirms that it works. If you do it a different way, it's another tool I can put in my toolbox for future adversities.
Yeah.
So, because future adversities are guaranteed.
Yeah. So what was it? Do you remember the day or just the time, around the time that you said, enough's enough, I'm fixing this? Do you remember kind of that moment where you go, I'm digging out of this and I'm changing?
Yeah, it was in Traverse City, Michigan, and a very good friend of mine had a talk with me, and I didn't think he knew that I was abusing opiates as much as I was, but he had found out that I was, and he was a dear friend, and I mean, he still is a friend, even though geographically we're so far away, we don't communicate very much. But he had said to me, look, I wish I could say that he said something profound, and he did obviously say something profound, but he said the same thing that 500 people have said to me in the 5 years prior. If you don't change what you're doing, you're going to die. And and one thing that kind of stuck out a little bit was, he says, you've been out of the league now for 3 years. And I was like, wait, I've been out of the league like 9 months. And I had actually been out of the league for 3 years.
Wow.
And I like literally went up. So you got to think, this is 1995. So I like went up to the wall where like you'd have a wall calendar, right? Which I don't even know if people use anymore.
Right.
But I'm looking at the date and the year, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, it has been it's 1995. And I got, booted out of Green Bay in 92 because, they didn't want to renew my contract. They wanted nothing to do with me, and I don't blame them. And I, and I was like, wow. And then I said, look, I've tried literally hundreds of different ways, because I know that that's the problem. But I said, I can't, I just can't seem to kick it. And he had asked me, he's like, have you ever tried an inpatient treatment center? And I said, no, but I'm willing to try. And then I went back on my words right away. I said, you know what, give me 24 hours to think about treatment.
Right.
And, he's like, absolutely. And, when he left, I remember walking into the bathroom and looking myself in the mirror at my house, and I was disgusted with what I saw. I was disappointed. Disgusted is a good description. I was like, what? It was kind of like I hated the person in the mirror. And I was like, right then and there, I knew. And he had only left an hour. And I was like, this was like, say 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And I said, in the morning, I'll give you an answer. And I still, and I just had one of those nights of a lot of contemplation and reflection on life. And I shouldn't say life, but just my experiences in the last, say, 5 or 10 years. And how did I get here from being, on top of the world in college to a fast off the cliff, right? And so a lot of like that self-evaluation, and then I called him the next day and I said, I'll do anything to get sober. I said, because I do not want to live in this hell. Like, I don't want to live in this misery again. And they didn't have the treatment center I went to was just outside of Detroit in Brighton, Michigan. And it was just called Brighton Hospital. And I think it's still there. But yeah, I had enough of my BS. I was sick and tired of myself and all of the BS that was coming out of my mouth.
Wow. It's it's gonna help people, man. It is. So you make this comeback, right? You get cleaned up. Yep. And I heard you say on another podcast, you were talking with some of the Michigan State guys, which is just excellent
Oh
seeing you
yeah,
guys.
yeah, good
That was a
guys.
lot of fun, man. A lot of fun. I heard you, kind of talking to them and saying, "All right, I'm going to do it the right way," right? And you
Yeah,
made your comeback. And
yep.
we all know, just to skip ahead a little bit, and then I want to backtrack and hear kind of how that unfolded. You go to the Colts, you play for 2 years. I believe you started 16
Three
games.
years,
Was it
3
3?
years. Yeah.
Wow. And you play out yeah. So I mean, you kind of burst back onto the scene, and the way I remember it and looking back, pretty solid years too. Like it was
Yeah.
you play at this level.
They were solid. From my perspective, it was like a miracle. Like
Right,
I
right.
couldn't like I couldn't get off the couch because I was doping so much. And 11 months later, I'm sober and re-signed in the league. So it's a shock that somebody even gave me a chance because I'd burned all my bridges.
Yeah.
So I think to myself, okay, just because you signed doesn't mean you make the 53-man roster. You still got to make the roster and then aspirations to play. But I thought to myself again, to me it was, it's a God shot. It's one of those. It was another reminder that when you do the work and you do the right things, and I'm very extremely faith-based and have been really most of my life, but especially in my later adult life. It's like, it's easy to say, God will take care of things, but you just can't sit around doing nothing. It's like you have to double and triple down on your works. And so I was lucky enough that Indy gave me a chance. And when I talked to them, when they worked me out, I was as transparent with them as I am with you today. And I said, look, this is what happened. And I gave them the synopsis, and they had some questions, and I answered them. And I said, so just so you guys know, you're getting damaged goods because you're taking a risk. If you even choose to give me a contract or offer me a contract, you're taking a risk on somebody who's in recovery, where more than 50% of the people relapse. So you're taking a risk with damaged goods. And was that going to help me make more money? Heck no.
Right.
But you know what it was doing? It was being transparent and letting them know, and let's not BS ourselves, we're the product that goes on the field. When Peyton's not on the field, not as many people go to the game. When Favre's not on the field, not as many people go to. When Sterling Sharp is not on the field, who should be in the Hall of Fame, by the way, not as many people go to the games. So it's like, you're the product, and I understand that. I'd say 99% of the players understand that. If they don't, they're naive. But it's like, I want them to know that if they're willing to risk taking a chance on me, I want them to know the truth, and that I come with baggage that I'm cleaning up.
Yeah, it almost, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like for the first time in a long time, if not maybe your entire life, adult life, you got to the point where it's like, I'm good enough. I can.
Oh yeah.
I'm okay with myself. I'm okay with the person I'm becoming, and just open yourself up, because 6'6", 308 pounds, running a 4.6 40. This monster of a human being. You're built up all through college, and rightfully so. Arguably one of the best offensive linemen to ever play college ball. You're built up on this pedestal. I'm superhuman,
right,
and
right.
then for it to come crashing down, and then you having to accept the fact that, hey, look, this is who I am, and I'm going to make the best out of what's remaining. Man, that is the true comeback story. It's amazing.
Yeah, to me, and I think I said this on a podcast I did yesterday. I think it was the podcast yesterday. I mean, as any athlete that has made it to a professional level in any sport, you're going to accumulate a lot of trophies and awards from high school throughout all the way up to pros. And if you're lucky enough in the pros, you get some awards. And I had, lots of stuff, right? I mean, and just in the last 3 years, I got rid of everything except one thing. The only thing I kept was this probably $5 plaque that was the 1996 Indianapolis Colts Comeback Player of the Year.
Wow.
That was it. I was the only player ever to be on the All Madden team out of college, because that's for the pros.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
John Madden had named me to that team from Michigan State when I was still in college.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so to this day, yeah, and now they don't have that award anymore, but they ran it for like whatever 15 years or 20 years. So I had this awesome like trophy, like it was cool. It was very heavy, like pewter and all the names etched into it. And you look at all the names of all the players, you're like, man, like all these guys are awesome. And you got that award from John Madden for being like nasty and tough,
right.
like
Gritty,
one of the blue collar, right? So, that I always cherish that award is because it was given by a coach, right? And it was given to somebody who was in college, who wasn't even in the pros yet, and yet he was naming me. But it's time, and don't get me wrong, I still am proud of that. I appreciated that. But it didn't mean anything to me anymore. And it wasn't like it meant, like, I didn't feel like I didn't deserve it. I didn't feel like, well, I took steroids, so I don't deserve it. I didn't feel like that at all. I still don't feel like that.
Right.
It just didn't mean that much to me. I looked at everything I had, and the thing that meant most to me was probably one of the things that was physically least expensive. It was a little plaque that I was awarded after my first year in Indy for 1996 Comeback Player of the Year. And because that means more to me, the work that went into getting that, and my aspiration wasn't to get that. My aspiration was to slay the demons and prove to myself and basically make a quiet amends by playing the game right, keeping my mouth shut, not being an arrogant SOB, and just doing the right things. Just be a role model, be a leader, be the best you can be. Don't do it the way I know what not to do.
Right.
And don't do those things. So it gave me a lot of good direction, and I was lucky enough to get the opportunity because, like I said, that nobody had to offer me one. So, that was like that little plaque I keep, and it's not even on a wall. It's just in my closet. But I keep it because I don't want to get rid of it, because I think probably just because of the meaning behind it. Yeah. That was harder. It's harder to overcome a great adversity, or I should say it was harder to overcome that great adversity than it was to be the second player taken in the draft.
Yeah.
3 times as hard. 5 times as hard, maybe.
Yeah. Don't ever get rid of that. If you need someone to hold it, we will lock it away. I will get a secure box, because, man, that is the Lombardi. It sounds silly, but that's the Lombardi Award. To your life, and it is amazing. It's probably, like you said, probably the thing that has the least amount of, monetary, value.
Physical value. It's just a plaque on a piece of wood, and it's it's a nice little plaque you can get at any award store have made for a high school team or whatever. And here's the great thing. Everybody's capable of doing that. It doesn't have to be an NFL player. Capable in your own life of overcoming great adversity. I had great adversity. Everybody's got great adversity in their life. Unfortunately, mine was on the front page.
Right.
So, that's why maybe more people know. Okay. But everybody, your neighbor, at some point in life, everybody has great adversity. And that's when I think is a great time to look at yourself and ask yourself, okay, now I'm going to see what I'm made of. Now I'm going to see how much faith do I really have, because I can be all smiley and happy when the money's flowing and the kids are healthy and the relationships are right and everything's going well. it's easy to be happy then. It's when you're hit with adversity after adversity, and they don't all have to be mountains. They can just be speed bumps, some of them hills and some of them mountains. But how do you persevere that over time? And that's, when I find out that, who I am, what do I stand for? And I'm not perfect. I do fail, but I know that I can get over it. And I know I can move on. And I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect by any means. I have a lot of work to do, which gives me hope that I will live a longer life, right? Because there's so much work to still do and to become a better, I don't want to get all biblical, but a better child of God, right? It's like, I know that you say the word God around people and some people get weird, but it's like, you know what, if they're saying all these other terms, I'm not going to be ashamed of saying, Christ or my God either.
Come on, man.
So it's time for me, I am going to start being more vocal about it.
Yeah.
Because
that inspires me to be more vocal about it, Tony. It does. Yeah. And the thing that bothers me is there's this picture that's painted of someone who is a Christian, someone who believes in God or has however you want to word it. There's 5,000 different ways that people, try to construct it now. And it's like it's way simpler than that. It's way simpler than that. But when you get to the point where it's, what? Everything in society is telling us you've got to impress everyone. We've got all these filters on Instagram. We've got, social media, and everybody's trying to act like they're better than they are. And everyone's just so damn afraid to be the person that they are and accept others for who they are. That's how we all grow. We need more people talking like that. We need more people that, rather than being, hey, look, I'm attached to this political party or that political party or this faith, it's what can I do to help the person next to me? What can it could be a smile, it could be encouragement, it could be money, it could be anything. But what can I do to make this place a little bit better than the way I found it?
Exactly.
And I think we can do it. I do. I end every show.
I know. I know we can do it.
I end every show with, let's go out and be the change that we want to see in the world. And I'm sure there's people that roll their eyes when they hear it, and that's okay. They've got the right to believe the way they want to believe.
Absolutely.
But I know this, when you're laying on that deathbed and you're drawing that last breath, I have a hard time believing I'm going to be sitting there going, I wish I'd have posted one more picture on social media. It's probably going to be, I let that person down. I wish I'd have done a little bit more. And at this moment, it's, how can we forgive ourselves and be a better human being to other people? That way, when it is all said and done, it's, hey, man, for lack of a better way of putting it, I've left it all on the field, right? I fought the good fight.
Exactly. And my thing now is I need to be more vocal about it. And I'm not worried about getting canceled, because you can't really cancel me from anything. It's like, I'm an entrepreneur, so it's like, you can go ahead, cancel whatever you want. I'm not big enough to cancel anymore. At one time maybe, but I've also been very careful with my speech, because I don't want to stir stuff up. Right. Yeah. But I also don't want stuff shoved in my face either.
Absolutely.
And the more, the thing that happened in 2020, as planned as it was, these are my words, nobody else's, I think it was good, because it revealed more corruption around the world than it did, I think, the initial plan, how they wanted it to work out. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that corruption being revealed made me kind of tilt my head and go, like, what is this? Like, what are these people saying, like, about this or about this topic? Or like, it's like they're saying, it's like I'm holding a remote up and I'm saying, okay, this is black. And they're saying, no, it's yellow. And it's like, no, it's black. And it's like, they will fight to the death that it's yellow. Right. It's like, well, this stuff doesn't make sense. All that being said, and obviously that's just an example,
Yeah.
seeing all these things, I started to see a lot of stuff that was not so much left or right or my opinion or against your opinion. I was starting to see way more good versus evil.
Yeah.
And that drove me back to the Bible for me,
Hmm.
because now I was like, okay, now I'm going to study the Bible instead of just reading it. I'm going to study it. And, that will take the rest of my life, but it brings it back to fundamentals and the moral laws for me. And it's like, yeah, these are the things that I'm in line with. Do I have a lot of work to do? Absolutely. We all do.
Yeah.
But it's that for me is a foundation. Now, when you start stepping on that foundation, I'm going to start standing up for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You knock on that door, we got to answer it. Got to answer it.
Yeah.
And, the thing that drives me crazy is if you took someone who is on this side, extreme, and someone on this side that was extreme, and you removed all the talking heads, all the mouthpieces, all of the
Right.
quote unquote data, all the facts, and all that,
Right.
and you sat down in a room and said, what do you want your life to be like and your country to be like? I guarantee you, Tony, you're going to come away going, I understand their point, but they've got us so divided that you can't even have that conversation.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you nailed it. It's true. What you said is 100% true. We are way more in common with our neighbors than higher authorities want us to think we are.
absolutely.
They're in the business. It seems like they're in the business of division.
Right.
And it's like, wait a second, why am I not seeing this division? Because 99% of the people I encounter are fairly rational and level-headed and friendly.
Yep.
And it's like, so I'm not, again, it was one of those things that just wasn't adding up, and it drove me back to the book to start studying, not just reading it, but studying it and understanding it. And, it's like bringing it around full circle to Reggie White. Reggie White was a minister. Reggie White was an extremely very much a man of God.
Yeah.
And he played like that. And, I played against him 3 times. And, the guy was like a complete package of a human being, not just a football player. He didn't talk smack. He was just an unbelievable human being. And, first time he just ragdolled me to death. Second time I played against him, he still dominated, but I played way better. But you're comparing to something when you got ragdolled. So, it's like, okay, well, I played better. I didn't get as ragdolled. And then the third time I played against him, I was in Indy and he was in Green Bay. He was on the latter part of his career. And I would say it was pretty much like a neutral.
Yeah.
But he was in the latter part of his career, and he was still one of the top 3 defensive ends in the league. And I thought to myself, like, that just shows you, hitting Reggie and playing against Reggie was like playing against concrete, and everybody else was drywall.
See, that's exactly what Mike Wall said. He worded it
Yep.
different, but he said when you hit Reggie, it was like, that's immovable. Like that's wow. That is wild. And
Right.
with Mike, that's a guy that went to the Naval Academy.
Right.
Just absolutely. You guys have a
Yeah.
lot in common. He said he
Yeah.
absolutely loved
Yeah.
working out. He said, I think I loved the conditional aspect as much, if not more, than the game. I just loved that whole, challenge.
And his whole, as far as a human being and a man of character, he was as great a man of character as he was a football player on the football field.
Yeah.
I mean, if I would say, look, aspire to be like this kind of a man, I would point to a Reggie White.
Yeah.
And I feel fortunate that I just, that I got to play against him 3 times. And, we had some minor discussions on the field, that were all civil, but it was like, just to be able to watch his career and be like, wow, like that is the way to do it. Like what he's doing something right. It's not just ability. It's not just physical ability. He's got something else going on too, that he's harnessed with that ability. And broke my heart when I heard, the day he passed. It really broke my heart, and I didn't think it would affect me as much as it did.
Wow.
Because it's not like a guy that I would call or maybe 2 minutes of full conversation with him over a 3 or 4 year period, but the impact he left just by the things he said, and more so by how he lived his life.
Yeah. Yeah. I was lucky enough to be in Lambeau when they retired his number, and the night before, I get it mixed up. It was either Friday night or Saturday night before. I'm pretty sure it was Friday night before. I got to meet his wife and one of his sons. I think he had multiple kids, but it was, I believe, his oldest son. Man, just amazing people, and her just that same joy that you've seen on Reggie's face when he was not doing the hump move and throwing people across the field. You could see it in her eyes, and it was just like, wow. It just, and still a woman of faith, even though she had lost Reggie. And I'll be real, when he passed, the first thing that went through my mind was what happened, and then the second thing was, well, what a reward he had waiting on him for the human being he was.
I mean, seriously. I mean, it is. It's an incredible human being.
Well, you've been extremely generous with your time, and I'll tell you, Tony, we appreciate it. I want to end it with this. There's been a ton of comments here tonight that have rolled through that said, we got to get him back to Green Bay. We got to get him in Lambeau. Have you been back? Have you went back to Lambeau?
It's interesting. I have not been back since 92 or 93. So that's, almost 30 years. God. So, like when I look at the stadium, like when they're on primetime football, and I'm like that thing just looks awesome. It's like the field's the same though. Right. And it's like, and I know that feeling in that stadium, and it's like, and it's like, it's on. I'm kind of like, you know what? I have a feeling when the time is right, I'll come back. But I can't be also, too nonchalant about it. It's like, I have to do some actions, and I have to come back and just, revisit that and see all the changes. And I mean, I remember it's like funny things you remember, the paper mills, right? It's like, it's funny. Like, why do I remember the paper mills? Because they were huge. I mean, they were all around the world at Fort Howard, and so, look, I don't even know if Fort Howard's still in business. I don't know if they lead the world industry in paper still, but I remember going to restrooms, doesn't matter where you were, you'd see Fort Howard like imprinted on the metal thing. And, I was like, Green Bay has made a stamp for itself. Right. Yeah. But yeah, I got to get back.
Yeah. How about this? And there's plenty of time to plan, but the draft is going to be in Green Bay in 2025. What if we get Tony Mandarich back in the house for the 2025 NFL draft? Can we make that happen?
There's no reason why it can't happen.
Yeah, let's do that.
I would be willing.
I'm going to go ahead and start the campaign, and Ryan, who founded Packernet Podcast, who we're doing this podcast for, I know he'll back it as well. We need to make this happen, because I'm telling you, I know this isn't your style, but I'm going to say it, and this is my opinion. This isn't Tony's. Everything I've seen in the media, for the most part, other than the E60 where they did and actually heard your side of the story, it's bust, selfish, all these things. People need to hear how this story ended, and it not ended, but that chapter closed, which opened up this whole new opportunity of making a difference in this crazy little world, man. We're gonna make it happen. I'm holding you to it, Tony. We're going to the draft in 2025.
All right, that's what a great place to have a draft.
Yeah, that's what we said. Man, could you imagine the brat smell that we talked about?
I might gain 10 pounds on that trip.
Tony, thank you so much, man.
My pleasure, man.
Anything else you got that you want to share before we wrap up?
No, I just, I appreciate you inviting me onto the podcast, and I didn't come on here with any motivation to clear my name or anything. It's like, what you see is what you get. It's like, yeah, we know. I mean, a lot of people know the story and some people don't. And it's like, I don't feel compelled to make sure they know the rest of the story, but it's kind of like, it will help people. It helps me, because when I talk to people and they're like, all I knew was that first part, because, media doesn't like to cover good stuff. It's like they like to, headlines are the adversities, and I'm not blaming them or anything. It's just, but it's like, yeah, there's different parts of the story, and Green Bay is always, like, when I say Green Bay, I mean the fans, the organization, the city. They were always good to me. There were times that they were down on me, but 99% of my experience in Green Bay, the people were good to me, and it's something I'll never forget. So and so God bless them all, and I look forward to coming back to revisit.
Awesome. We're going to make it happen. Tony, thank you so much for your time. Thanks to everybody in the chat. Again, this I heard that. I want to give credit to those guys on the Michigan State podcast, because I would not have invited you on just out of the fact of, I don't want to put him in a spot to where, this turns negative for him. And then when I heard you tell your story, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is going to help somebody. This is going to help people, because we get this picture painted that, just like we said with social media and everything else, that everybody's all hunky-dory and everything's perfect. It don't have to be perfect. It don't matter where you're at. You can say, right now, I'm drawing a line in the concrete. Hey, things are changing. And then to be able to just take it and flip it and help other people we're only here for a limited amount of time, right? So let's see if we can make a good mess while we're here, right?
Yep, and everybody can do it. Everybody can do it.
Love it. Tony, thank you so much for your time. Guys, we're going to get out of here. We really appreciate everybody hanging out with us. As always, let's go out and be the change we want to see in the world, and go Pack Go.
Inches to go. To Bader. 17 to 14. Cowboys out in front. Star begins the count.